Well, hello all, and welcome to this educational series we're calling Moving Towards Solutions from Homelessness to Housing. I know there are many who are not able to be here with us at this particular time, but they're going to join us by way of the recording, and we are recording this evening. So welcome all. We appreciate you all making the time to learn from this presentation. My name is Debbie Wild. I'm a member of the Roaring Fork Built for Zero team. I have lived and worked alongside you all for many years, and I know and you know that together we have made the best out of challenges and opportunities. Life does not stand still, so neither must we. And here we go again, together. Today we launch this educational series to create a more thoughtful community conversation and to invite more community members to actively participate in solutions. It's our good fortune to have great help with that. I'm excited to introduce you to my friends from Interfaith Alliance who will lead us through this journey. Matt, who has worked so hard behind the scenes to bring all the technology and all the graphic presentation together, thank you. And now Jen and Kathleen, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Debbie. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do want everyone to know we will be speaking slowly and taking a few pauses just for translation purposes. So I have not frozen. If I pause, we are just trying to ensure that our translator has an opportunity. So we're so excited to be here this evening. Again, this is our series, as Debbie said, that's called Moving Towards Solutions. This is from homelessness to housing. And of course, you have the wonderful Built for Zero in Glenwood, and we're so absolutely thrilled to be able to talk a little bit about that today as well. We want to thank our sponsors. Of course, we have ourselves, Interfaith Alliance, who are here today, but we also want to thank Glenwood Springs Chamber Foundation, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority, and the City of Glenwood Springs, who allowed us to convene so that we can start to have these conversations. So my name is Kathleen Van Boris. I'm the Director of Housing Justice at the Interfaith Alliance. I have over a decade of experience working with housing and homelessness across our nation, including in my wonderful home state of Colorado. I joined the Interfaith Alliance on March 16th of 2020 and have been happily working through the pandemic with multiple locations around the state, looking at homelessness and housing and what best practices are. And I'm joined today with my great colleague, Jen Lopez.
Hi, everyone. I really wish I was there in person, and we are hoping that by the end of the series, we will be there in person. It's so much more dynamic, but I am a housing consultant, and I also do a lot of work in homelessness programming and permanent supportive housing. I'm based in Durango, and I've been doing this work for 22 years and have worked across the state, and I just feel a kinship with Glenwood Springs. Debbie and I talk a lot about the similarities between Durango and Glenwood Springs. So hopefully we can continue to talk and share stories of how we make our communities more whole and healthy and vibrant places to live. So thanks for being with us today.
And if you are joining us a little bit late and you were unable to hear about our translation, this does actually show you. If you click the interpretation button, it will give you the option of listening in Spanish or in English. So expectations. We know that this is a very difficult topic. We know that there are people that have multiple experiences and a range of emotions, and all of those are valid. And so what we ask in this space as we have these conversations is really that we treat everyone with respect, even if they have a difference of opinion. we need to be, I'm being told I need to slow for translation. Sorry, guys. We need to be curious. We want everyone, no matter what your experiences have been, to truly be open, listening to your neighbors, listening to solutions. The goal of this, again, is truly to bring the community together and to find a solution as we come together that's going to work best for everyone in the community. We ask that you don't interrupt. You can obviously unmute. We did not want to do this in a webinar setting so that we could have some of those dialogues and so that we could be together as much as possible as a community over Zoom. We ask you again to please be open to thoughts and experiences. And obviously, if there's any behavior that's not respectful, we do want you to know that we will remove you if you unmute and start yelling or use disrespectful language. We don't expect that, but we do like to set those expectations up front. So, session 1 objectives. So we like to go an overview of what this series is going to be, just so everyone has an understanding. An introduction as to who we are as the Housing Equity Campaign, as well as an in-depth exploration of the causes and costs of homelessness. So we know that homelessness has always been a topic of discussion, but with the increase around the city, we really wanted to offer an opportunity to broaden education and understanding, to look at these best practices and try and see what solutions might work for Glenwood Springs. Again, the ultimate goal is to end these sessions by building a coalition of community members that are willing to help move the ideas forward. We're going to talk more about best practices in the coming meeting. And of course, then this coalition's job would be to bring those to fruition. We know resources are coming that are going to assist with this, with homelessness and with housing. And the time is really right now to start planning what is the problem, how do we look at this, and best solutions for the entire community. So a little bit about the Housing Equity Campaign. So we were originally founded in 2018. We were known as the Congregation Land Campaign. They were originally founded to go in and help faith communities who had underdeveloped or underutilized land build affordable housing. In 2020, when I had the honor of coming on board, our Housing Equity Campaign began to support innovative solutions throughout COVID. So we began to really focus on short-term solutions for our unhoused, while also looking at long-term solutions for communities who are continuing to see housing prices increase and the number of their unhoused neighbors increase along with it. So we work across Colorado. We also do a lot of policy support. We want to see changes that address the need for affordable housing. This is support advising policies, advising local governments, how to best bring about affordable housing, all the way to working at the state to see what we can do to really ensure that we can have more affordable living options for all within our community. So with that, one of the things I love, and so now you all get to participate in, are Zoom polls. What we really want to know is, what do you believe about homelessness? Trying to think. There it comes. So these are true and false questions. And so we would love for you all to just, it's completely anonymous. No one is going to be able to tell who you were or what you said. But we'd love to know what you think about these questions, whether you think they are true and false, and we will go after that in about 2 minutes. If everyone could just take a second to fill that out. Oh, yes.
Do you want me to do it?
Sure.
All right. First question is, true or false? Many people experiencing homelessness have chosen it as a lifestyle. Number 2, most people experiencing homelessness are single individuals with substance abuse issues. Number 3, homelessness is on the rise because of the cost of housing costs, rising costs of living, economic impacts of COVID, etc. Number 4, most people experiencing homelessness can't be housed because they have complex issues and don't know how to be a tenant. Number 5, most people experiencing homelessness need less than 2 years of support to get back on their feet. Oh, do you want to just go back?
Sure.
See what we need to do. You want to do the first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. So many people experiencing homelessness have chosen it as a lifestyle. 76% said that this is false. 24% say that this is true. We are going to talk about some of the reasons that people become unhoused or experience homelessness and the different types of homelessness, because there are different types tonight. For the most part, this is false. We do not see very often that there are unhoused individuals who would rather be unhoused. There are unhoused individuals who have a hard time going into congregate sheltering, or who have been unhoused for such a significant time that going into rehousing needs to involve services and support. But we will talk through that a little bit. Do you want to do number 2?
I do, and I just want to add to that. So in my community in Durango, we have a sanctioned camp, and we've spent time with campers and talked with them, and they're happy being in a sanctioned camp, but many of them would much rather be inside. And so a lot of times we don't have the right housing choice available to folks, and so you'll ask them, do you want to be here or there? We need to be offering more opportunities, and we're just not there yet in our communities, right? So the second one was, most people experiencing homelessness are single individuals with substance abuse issues. False. You all are very smart. Debbie's been probably in her team doing a lot of education for a while. But, I think in COVID, this is even more true that that's not the case. So oftentimes in our communities, and again, I'll speak from my own experiences, we think the homeless population is the panhandler in the corner, right? And we know in rural communities in particular, we have a lot of car camping and couch surfing and families, right, that are really struggling and are homeless. We have a hard time counting populations in our communities, and so we don't have the resources or the volunteer power. Then you have COVID-19 come along, and I don't know about you all, but we didn't do a count. Lots of different household composition sizes folks are experiencing homelessness in our communities. Next.
So the next one was, homelessness is on the rise because of the cost of housing, rising cost of living, economic impacts of COVID-19, etc. 92% said true, and this is absolutely true. Again, this is something that we'll touch more deeply on, but we did see, especially with COVID, loss of seasonal jobs, loss of hourly jobs, especially with the shutdown, a rising number of individuals who were unable to pay for basic needs. We saw a rising number of individuals who became homeless. While there were eviction moratoriums, many people who had leases that ended during COVID, those leases were not renewed. So we did have plenty of people who were put back out onto the street or put onto the street because of that. Homelessness is also rising because we are now the 8th most expensive state in the country to live in. It takes us, and we'll go through this, but 2 full-time minimum wage jobs just to form a 1-bedroom apartment on average in our state. This is not any different from what I see with the statistics Debbie has provided about Glenwood Springs. So this is true that the rising cost of housing is leading to a higher number of unhoused individuals. And again, we'll talk about unhoused and what those definitions are, because we are this evening including those sleeping in their cars, those who are having to couch surf with friends, anyone who does not have their own roof over their head and is unable to do such is who we will be including in that definition tonight.
And we're not talking yet, and so I'm going to bring it up now, and we have slides later that share some statistics, but the other impact of COVID-19 was everybody came to Colorado. So I know it's hit the Western Slope, it's hit Southwest Colorado. I'm shocked at the lack of inventory, and so we had a problem before COVID. We got to buckle up because it's going to be a crazy ride for a couple of years. So I'm going to talk about, oops, the next one. Where are we at? There we go. Most people experiencing homelessness can't be housed because they have complex issues and don't know how to be a tenant. True or false? So this one is a little bit closer, a little bit more of a mixed reaction. And what I would say is I do a lot of permanent supportive housing work, and I actually manage a program in my own community. And if you do not have the right level of support services, they cannot stay housed. And so I've had to evict a couple of folks in my building because I didn't have a high enough level of services. And so we know that the hardest to serve, the most complex cases need really robust services, and I don't think we're there yet in Colorado. So this is something we're still solving for. How do you provide tenancy supports and behavioral health on site? So we're working on it, and so give me all the money in the world, we can house anyone, right? So it's part of that continuum of getting the resources lined up.
And I also do just want to add to this one. And we'll talk again about the varying populations that are experiencing homelessness. We are seeing an unbelievable increase in families experiencing homelessness across the state of Colorado, especially along the Western Slope. This is something that is because, again, of housing prices. We have families who cannot afford to be rehoused. So again, it's a population that is not dealing with substance abuse issues, needing those resources, but it is, again, with the fact that we are becoming a state where being financially sound is almost impossible for anybody who is working, especially working poor to minimum wage jobs.
And middle class.
Yes.
It's creeping up to the middle class.
So most people experiencing homelessness need less than 2 years of support to get back on their feet. And I'm going to let you speak a little to this with your experience.
Yes. And I'm going to do a shout out for Built for Zero. So I'm such a huge fan of Built for Zero. We'll talk about it later in this call. But the idea is that any community can create a system where you can assess what a person who's unhoused needs, both from a housing perspective, the rent level they can pay, and the level of services that they need. And what we know from statistics is if you have 100 people experiencing homelessness in a room, 70 to 75% of those folks could be housed and stabilized within 2 years. So I think a lot of times we think everybody needs intensive supportive housing forever, and that's not the case. About 25% do. And so again, a perfect scenario in our communities is we have a continuum of options, and we're doing a really good job of pairing folks based on their need.
Thank you all for participating in that poll. It's changed. So first, we'd like to really dive into what are the macro drivers of homelessness. We have general economic context, which we'll talk about, of course, housing costs, which you've heard come up multiple times, rise in healthcare costs, rise in healthcare treatment as well, which we saw during COVID, mental health and substance abuse, we're going to touch on, again, disconnection and isolation.
I just want to add that this is one that people are surprised to hear. A couple of years ago, there was a few studies done, and what they found was that homelessness is it's not about housing, it's about lack of relationship. So, I mean, yes, it's about housing, but folks that end up homeless, it's at the end of the day, they don't have the relationships to pick them up. So,
sure, that safety network. So, general economic context. Again, 1970s and 1980s, we saw this great U-turn. There was the shift between manufacturing to low-wage service jobs, which is important to understand. And again, we see the inflation, right? The cost of general goods and services increased 547%. Okay, all three common income indicators are growing at a much slower rate, which means if we look at the average minimum wage was only 353%, average wages 400%, and the median household income 511%. None of those have kept up with the service increase of 547%. So that is something we need to understand when we look at systemic failure, right? The economic context. Education, oh. So sorry, translation.
I'm sorry, I should have been watching.
No.
Education is unaffordable. Let me see if I can slow down. We all know this, right? When I went to college, it was $800 a semester. I'm sending my daughter, it's $25,000, right? Many people are living this reality. And so if the only way to better yourself is education, yet it's unattainable or unaffordable, you're really trapped in that poverty cycle. So that's definitely a part of what's happening.
And there is a very fascinating study that just came out a couple of weeks ago about COVID and individuals who had to declare bankruptcy in COVID. And of course, student loans are very difficult when it comes to bankruptcy. They follow you for life. So we are seeing a cycle again with this unaffordable education where we are having people go to school, but it is starting people off in a level of poverty. So mental health, did you want to touch on? All right.
Housing, do you want me to do housing?
Oh, sorry, housing costs.
Yeah,
Yes.
let me do that. So, there's, we can drown in statistics. So I'm going to just say the punchline here, which is there is a correlation, a very strong correlation between rising housing costs and rising homelessness. So, what this slide says is the top 5 states with housing costs were also the top 5 states for homelessness. Another statistics throughout the country, housing prices have grown at more than 2.5 times the growth rate of minimum wage and nearly double median household income. I'm going to stop there because we live in Colorado. We all live this every day, so we're not going to preach this anymore. But housing is a big factor, and it's exciting as a housing professional to finally get to talk about housing as a solution. So this is a moment in time where we're going to see more resources, and so it's not all gloom and doom.
All right, and mental health and substance abuse. So institutionalization really led a lot to seeing our unhoused who are struggling with mental health and substance issues. So it used to be, right, that we had federal government hospitals for people who were experiencing mental illness or struggling with any form of substance abuse. That all went away. We started to send people to mental health centers. And so that really dropped the number of patients who were living at these state hospitals from 535,000 to 137,000. The support and the housing resources and the day-to-day safety net resources were not there for these individuals when we deinstitutionalized these facilities. Many of them, of course, ended up on the street, becoming unhoused, dealing with a lot of homeless situations where they were trying to receive treatment but could not afford to work, could not afford to keep a house. Social Security Act of 1980 compounded the problem. It tightened the disability eligibility process. It is still unbelievably difficult to qualify for disability these days. And it is something that we hear very commonly when we are registering individuals who are coming into congregate shelter, who are coming into safe outdoor spaces. It is a very difficult situation to get them registered for that safety net program. It is also important to know that one of the things you need to register for disability is the ability to produce Social Security cards, IDs, things of that nature, which sometimes individuals are unable to hold on to or simply do not have. Again, a lot of this fell back down into not having a family, right? Not having that safety net that we could rely on.
Rise in healthcare costs. Again, probably preaching to the choir here, but just a couple statistics. The Kaiser Family Foundation found a 3,400% rise in US spending on healthcare since the 70s. Not a lot of formal studies connecting the cost of healthcare to people losing their homes, but we know from stories, from interviews, that that is indeed happening. I know when I went out a few years ago and was doing interviews in Durango, a couple of the folks I spoke with were recovering from cancer. So also interesting in this space is we're seeing, I just had a call today, I was telling Kathleen, with a hospital in Santa Fe, they're actually going to be buying a motel for us to do a conversion because of this relationship, right? Because people aren't covered, they go in for treatment, they fall behind, they end up homeless, they're still sick, they still need to be somewhere where they can get services. So, yeah.
And this is what we touched on before, this disconnection and isolation. So again, a very important point, even when we go to some of the safe outdoor spaces and we see the best practices, is that it creates a community. One of the things that is very common with everyone we speak to, no matter where they are, is that they lack the family and community support. So when they fall on hard times, there is no one for them to lead on. People come isolated as adults due to domestic violence, traumatic experience. We saw domestic violence rise over 86% across the nation during COVID because people were trapped inside with their abusers. We saw those individuals become highly unhoused across the nation. That's very isolating. These are people who are fleeing domestic violence. And so they do tend to remain isolated or go to a place where they could not be found. Again, violent situations in households with heavy substance abuse may not have family support or adults they can lean back on, and people whose families are already struggling financially. So if you were born into a family who was struggling financially, if you have a family history of not being stabilized in a home, not being stabilized and sleeping in cars, we know this through the Department of Education, that can tend to be a cycle because you're born into poverty and you are not given the same experiences for stability.
So if you're on the western, well, you're on the western slope, you're in Glenwood, sorry. Grand Junction has the most phenomenal new homeless community called Laurel House for homeless youth. And I was over there on Friday, and what struck me was this cycle of poverty. So parents couldn't take care of their kids, or there was substance abuse or meth, or there was some issue. The child youth gets stabilized. The family comes to try to get support from the youth. It's really wild. So again, these are family systems, right? And it takes tremendous effort to break that cycle of poverty.
So now we're going to do another Zoom poll. We want to know, have you or someone you know experienced financial difficulty anytime throughout your life?
I'm going to go ahead and read this for the translator, because what a champ. I can't imagine translating. You're doing a beautiful job. We're so glad you're with us tonight. So the full question and the options are, have you yourself or someone you know experienced one of the following? Check all that apply. 1, a job loss or reduction in hours. 2, inability to make a housing payment, rent, or mortgage. 3, a health issue that created financial difficulties.
Wonderful. So it looks like 84% of the individuals on this call know somebody who had a job loss or reduction of hours. That was very common during COVID, but obviously something that occurred pre-COVID. Instability to make a housing payment, we're saying rent or mortgage, 53% of you. and a health issue that created financial difficulties. Over half of you, 53%. So, yes, do this one.
So this is sort of like a coffee chat with Kathleen and I. We're not together very often. This is our reunion after a little bit of time. I love this slide so much because this has been my experience in this field for the last 8 years. So, right, this is a really complex issue, a huge systems failure. So there are many factors at work, we just went through them, that make people more vulnerable to homelessness, right? We already had challenges. COVID-19 like put it on steroids in terms of an issue. Economic policies, the lack of safety net, housing prices and other systems are creating homelessness. People need to, yes, people need to be responsible for themselves when they can be. But we know from working with folks who are unhoused, and we know from studies that we are not all starting at the same place. We do not all have access to equal access to jobs, housing, and services. And I don't think we talk enough about the role of trauma and how trauma has a lifetime of impact on a person's ability to thrive. I'm excited to see in our field so much emphasis on trauma-informed design, because now when we're going into these buildings, you can literally see, see how spaces can help people calm themselves, feel safe, and be able to thrive inside. One more?
Sure, go for it.
All right, this is also my favorite slide because I think it's at the local level. I think it's like a perfect storm. So I have a lot of empathy for local communities and especially local electeds. I think this is a really hard thing to solve. So it's frustrating. It impacts the overall community, right? There's nothing positive that comes out of folks experiencing homelessness. It impacts everyone, but there's not one entity responsible. So there's a lot of who's supposed to do what, who pays for what, right? And it can be, I know in my own community, it took a couple years for everyone to say, look, we're all gonna step up together to the plate and take a piece. And it takes courage and coordination to do that. A few people take advantage of welfare systems, and that will paint an unfavorable picture of the unhoused community, and it will make it harder to provide supports and solve the crisis. I think it's important that we're honest with folks that push back when we're trying to provide services in our community. We need to acknowledge this does happen, and we know this is not the majority of folks, right? We know most people, we know they're looking for meaning. They're looking for a way to engage in community. I've done a lot of conversations at Purple Cliffs. They want to volunteer, they do cleanups, they want to go back to work, they want to see their grandkids, they want engagement, they want to give back to the community. Resources are generated, this is my biggest pet peeve, at the federal and state level, leaving less control for local communities to create the solutions that work for them, right? So how many HUD flyers, notices do we have to read and go, what? That's, how much do we have to do to spend this money? So I think we just got to acknowledge how difficult it is, and it's hard to find time for the policy advocacy, but it's critical. We know resources have never matched the growing need, and it forces us to prioritize the very few precious resources we have. So every community we work in, we're talking about how do you figure out who you're going to serve. And, it's a hard conversation, but you got to have it. Again, no one likes homelessness. It negatively impacts everyone, especially the folks on the streets.
So as we start to look at the scale of national homelessness, I always find it very important to talk about what we mean when we're talking about homelessness. What people see or define homelessness as varies even within our own government. So Housing and Urban Development define homelessness as living in a homeless shelter or a place that is unfit for human habitation. That is what you'll hear a lot, the point in time count. That comes through the housing and urban development terms and research. This does not encompass all of homelessness. And so the Department of Education uses a much broader definition for homelessness. Their definition of homelessness includes more families, includes people who are couch surfing, includes people who are having to stay from their car to motels, includes people who are outside as families, includes people who are maybe in a motel, a monthly rental for a little while, then on the street, then back in. They trace a lot of this through our children who are going to school and who are living outside or in cars. The reason this definition is one that I like to use is because it encompasses homelessness to me. Again, homelessness is not just simply the people who are living outside or in a congregate shelter, but they're also the people who have no place to go but the back of their car, or no place to go but hopping from a friend's couch to a friend's couch or a family member's couch in hopes that they can continue to do that until finding stability. It's important to know that on any given night in our country, we have 567,715 people that we have identified as homeless. Now, I want to mark that this is the most current number we have, and it is pre-COVID. We know that we've seen a 30 to 40% increase in the unhoused population in every state across the United States since COVID. We know that in 2019, before COVID, we already saw a 3% rise in homelessness. 70% in our nation are individuals, but 30% are families and couples. It is also vital to understand that people of color are disproportionately affected, especially by economic downturn, eviction, and we'll talk about housing rates as we move forward. Here we go. So again, I mentioned there are 3 types of homelessness. When we look at homelessness, again, we tend to see the panhandler or see the person we've seen for years and define that as homelessness. There are 3 key homelessness types and definitions. There's chronic homelessness. This refers to people who most likely fit that Skid Row stereotype, okay? They have been entrenched in the shelter system. They use it over again. They are what is considered hardcore unemployed by the housing and urban development. And they often suffer from severe mental illness, disabilities, substance abuse problems. And again, I want to stress that this is the smallest portion of our unhoused neighbors. Transitional homelessness, this is significant. This means that they are transitionally homeless individuals that enter a shelter system and stay for a short period of time. These people are most likely younger. They're probably recently homeless. It's very important to understand that over time, people who are experiencing transitional homelessness are individuals who will then find housing and then find employment. There's also episodic homelessness, those who frequently shuttle in and out of homelessness. These are known as episodically homeless. They're most likely to be young, but unlike those in the transitional homelessness, episodically homeless individuals often are chronically unemployed. They experience mental health problems, substance abuse, and other issues that have to be addressed with resources.
So Kathleen, we are a little behind. So can I catch us up on a couple slides?
Yes, please do.
I will still talk slowly, but I will hit the high levels. So homelessness, there is a gender and a sexual orientation lens. So there's some good statistics on this slide about how women and LGBTQ have especially high rates of homelessness for a number of reasons. Next. We've talked about mental health and substance abuse. Co-occurring disorder is how we talk about it in this space. A couple of statistics here about that correlation. Again, we don't want to make that oversimplification because we know the housing cost is a big part as well, but we do have data on this. Ooh, geography of homelessness, preaching to the choir. This is a gentleman on the slide who lives at the encampment in Durango. It's not just an urban issue. We all know that. We all live it every day. Odds of being poor are much higher if you're in a non-metro area. 1 in 5 non-metro counties are classified as high poverty, right? Well, while only 1 in 20 metro counties are defined as such. Homeless people in rural areas are more likely to be white, female, married, and currently working. homeless for the first time or for a shorter period of time. So interesting. I think this is important from a advocacy. I think, Kathleen, we should kind of go through these statistics a little more quickly.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do, Debbie, is we want to get to discussion. Does that sound good to you? All right. So lots of good slides here. If you watch this later on, we can send this out to everyone as well. But you can see that the racial inequality of homelessness. If you are a person of color, you are much more likely to be unstably housed and end up homeless. Again, those are pretty dramatic numbers. I will say in Colorado, I think the one that maybe surprises people the most, and I don't know that it's happening in Glenwood as much, but is the native numbers. They're pretty high in Southwest and Metro. Anyway, we do pay attention to these things, especially in this age of racial equity work. Just a quick note on this, on systematic discrimination. Redlining is the idea that we do not invest in certain areas of our community. I think some of this is, well, that's a Denver map. So I don't know how this shows up in your community, but I'm sure it shows up in certain ways. So in my community, it shows up that you live in the county where there's not as, we're on a well, right? So this redlining to me is about, do you have infrastructure or not in rural communities? And then denied leases, or I think on the Western Slope, we have a lot of no leases, informal leases, right? Like just lots of really bad practices around lack of tenant rights and good paperwork to protect tenants. And then we know we're paying higher rents. So that I think one of the things that's so disheartening about this whole time period is that with so much interest in the housing market in Colorado and with such weak protections, if a landlord doesn't want to mess with you, they don't have to. And we're seeing that. So we're watching really closely at the state that we're not just paying mortgages for landlords with the rent assistance, that we're actually using that money to try to stabilize people. It's very hard. But again, I assume most of you on this call have experienced that or heard this. Quickly, lots of statistics here, but about 10,000 homeless in Colorado. Again, we bet that's a lot higher today. And this is a good cross-section of chronic versus family versus veterans. Again, the doubling up is huge in our communities and something we need to solve for. So,
and just to point out, these are all 2019 numbers, but if you include the Department of Education, the school numbers that come in just through Colorado Schools and HUD, the Colorado Coalition predicted that we were about 29,000. Little over in 2019, and again they predicted about a 35% increase.
Homelessness in your community. So Debbie should be presenting this, but we're going to let Debbie just sit back and enjoy. So last point in time count was a shelter count in 2020. Cold weather overnight shelters at the time were housing 51 individuals. 2019 count of everyone in the region, 95 individuals. An attempt at a count in 2021 was not considered relevant by providers because of pandemic. Our only way to gauge this in the past has been through an under-resourced point in time. So I'm going to share this with Debbie because we talked about it before, but I know some rural communities are thinking about registry weeks this year. So something we could talk about. We've talked about this. Again, just want to point out some pretty terrifying statistics, really. We'll let you visit this slide, but again, I think, Glenwood, you probably are all living this reality. Next.
So this looks at the affordability. So again, please look into this. The GAP report is something that is available, or you're more than welcome to contact me, and I'm happy to send it to you. But we are in the top worst states for having the least most affordable housing. And what this is this shows the rental homes that are affordable for every 100, extremely low. We have 1 in 7 people can afford within our communities, especially along the Western Slope, to have an extremely low income affordable rent.
And this is what you're managing too, if you're trying to, so we haven't talked about it tonight, but we will talk about it in the next session, that a lot of our work has to be prevention, right? So we don't want to always be taking people who've fallen out and trying to rehouse them. We want to keep them from falling out. So managing those rent levels and understanding how many people are living on the edge is really important. That's just a quote. It's not a very good quote from your paper. And again, this really does mirror Durango's numbers. We're at 500,000 as well, which is just really, really hard. The market is really high. You know, we thought, I remember at the very beginning of COVID-19, I was looking back at 2009 and the financial crisis. And within a month, they said, oh, no, this is not going to be a housing crisis. And we've actually had the opposite, right? We have seen an incredible tightening in the housing market. So I would have actually liked a dip, right? We would have ran with a dip. So anyway.
So eviction. So we've talked a little bit about eviction. Jen just mentioned part of what we need to do is look at stability, really trying to ensure that we don't continue to see hundreds of individuals dumping out. This is another significant cause of homelessness. Again, we see very high eviction rates. In Colorado, we have tenant, very unfriendly tenant laws that allow people to be evicted for late fees, that allow people to be evicted even with payments for evictions that are coming down through the federal government. Even with CDC moratoriums in place and state moratoriums in place, there were gaps, and we saw thousands of evictions filed. Something that is absolutely terrifying is that we see about 850 evictions filed in a normal week pre-COVID. We are going to estimate seeing about 2,300 evictions filed per week once the moratorium is lifted. We have an estimate of over 300,000 Coloradans who are unable still to currently pay their rent and will be at risk of eviction. So we did see an increase in homelessness due to eviction during COVID.
Just to plug, we can talk about this in the next session too, but the state, the legislation that you've been advocating for, I don't think it's going to pass, but local governments do have some avenues. So we can talk about that to try to provide some protections and prevent eviction.
So again, these are just some fast statistics. 22 million Americans were at risk. Really the important one that we need to know is the 300,000 Coloradans are at risk. As we look at lifting emergency orders, and as we look at ending moratoriums, if we are truly trying to make an impact in our unhoused population, we're going to need to look at how to stabilize those who are currently at risk of eviction.
Doesn't it seem like a million years ago so a year ago, we started talking about safe outdoor spaces and everybody thought we were crazy. We spent the day today in Aurora where they were showing pallet homes, tiny homes, tents, car camping, right? So again, this is not where we want to be as communities, but this is the reality. There's a huge gap. People are falling out of housing. We have to have these alternative solutions going, or we're really going to just keep going backwards.
So again, impact of COVID on shelters. This is significant, so I want to take a second with it. We did not have enough shelter beds across the state to begin with. We saw an increase in those who were evicted, who lost their jobs, who were renting motels month to month, and were unable to continue those payments. We also had to cut our shelter space by 56% across the state of what we already had for social distancing and respite areas for COVID. This was a huge impact. Obviously, when you're in more rural communities, when you're on the Western Plains, when you're on the Eastern Plains, we had a lot of communities who did not have the option of creating large congregate shelters. So we had a lot of small shelters within small communities who were cut down by 50%, but seeing an 80% increase in need. This was not okay. Those individuals ended up outside. We saw plenty of encampments across the state, especially in our rural communities, pop up and increase, much like at Purple Cliffs and other areas. Again, day shelters and programs had to shut down or limit capacity. Congregations who would serve or allow showers or laundry cleaning, those had to shut down. A lot of our volunteer cold weather programs had to shut down. So we saw a lot more unhoused individuals outside than we have ever seen before.
And, oh my gosh, public hygiene. I think we spent 6 months talking about ideas around public hygiene for folks. And today in Aurora, we saw a $250,000 shower truck. That would not have been a conversation 5 years ago. So interesting shift.
So there's another Zoom poll. As we've seen an increase in unhoused neighbors, what is most concerning to you personally?
So Manuel, I'm going to read these for you. The first, so what is the most of most concern? Select your top concern. The first concern is it's hard to see our neighbors suffering. The second concern is the unhoused are negatively impacting downtown by panhandling or exhibiting behaviors that make community members and tourists uncomfortable. 3, waste, trash, etc. on trails, and parks, and other shared community spaces. 4, an increase in fire risk due to unsanctioned camping. 5, safety in the community overall. 6, if we increase services, we will attract unhoused people from outside the community.
Again, I just want to remind everyone that these are anonymous. So we really encourage you to be honest with wherever you are, wherever your stance is, whatever your experiences are. Okay. So 36%, it's hard to see our neighbors suffering. 7%, the unhoused are negatively impacting downtown by panhandling or exhibiting behaviors that make community members and tourists uncomfortable. 25%, waste, trash, etc. on trails, parks, and other shared community spaces. 14%, an increase in fire risk due to unsanctioned camping. 14%, an overall safety concern for the community. And 4%, if we increase services, will attract unhoused people from outside of the community. So first, I'd like to thank you all. This is wonderful to have people actually do these and do them honestly. So it's really wonderful to have you and your voice at the table, and I just want to acknowledge that. We also want to talk real quick about the cost of homelessness, right? Poverty and homelessness are not cheap. As the slide says, it costs $30,000 to $50,000 per year per person. That is unhoused. And again, this is because, and I'll go to the next slide.
Oh, and I was going to say, and I want to have a caveat here.
Okay.
There is so much data about the cost of homelessness. This is a bit of a generic slide. It's really best if you're able to track it at the local level. And I know you're tracking some of those costs right now.
So again, a general slide, right? Again, a lot of what we have isn't in general, but there's things to consider. So criminalization, criminal justice. So when we have to call the police, for example, law enforcement calls, when people are detained, when we take them in. Cost of sweeps. This is a topic that we would love to discuss. We are seeing a lot of places, not only in our state, but around the nation, who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on cleaning up unsanctioned encampment. But cleaning up what is the trash, cleaning up what is, the encampments that then move down the road, right? And so then that cost happens again. Emergency room visits. This is significant. We have a lot of individuals who go into the emergency room for varying things. This winter, we saw an uptick across our state in the number of individuals who went in due to cold weather issues, hypothermia, issues with limbs, issues with fingers. Because shelters were shut down, because there was not a place for them to go and become warm, we did see an increase in emergency room visits, which we pay for. And then, of course, wildfire mitigation, which I know Jen can speak to with Durango and Purple Cliffs. And we know that that's an issue even in your community. So those are just some costs we want, you to consider as we start to talk about what are our options. We have to know what is the cost.
And I just want to say this, I get the sense that there's a lot of supporters on this Zoom, which is amazing, because we do want to talk about solutions and build out the network of actors. But these are some good slides that we hope that you'll use some of these talking points to talk to folks who maybe aren't on board yet. So, right, some of the work that we need to do as communities is to talk to folks who maybe don't believe that we should be doing stuff. So I used to use a slide like this when I worked for Governor Hickenlooper in almost every meeting we did. And the punchline was the cost of doing nothing is nothing. And that really seemed to be a bipartisan message that everybody could hear. So
we're both about to say now is the time to act really loudly. So
we even have a cheer,
right? No, for so many reasons. It really is the time to act. So, and I know for my over a decade of experience, we have never seen this conversation really be this large. We've never had this many individuals engaged, whether you're engaged because you have somebody out in front, you're concerned about safety, whether you're engaged because of cost of housing or you're a provider. We now have these communities and coalitions coming together with all different experiences and having these tough conversations. One thing that I know, and Debbie, you're so wonderfully involved in this, is Built for Zero. And Jen and I.
Sorry, I've been a Built for Zero fan for years
Yeah.
and years and years. It's the reason I actually do the work that I do now is community solutions. And so I think, anytime we talk to communities and work in community, we always start with your strengths. And this is a huge strength for your area. Huge. So Built for Zero, again, is a infrastructure, community infrastructure where folks who are serving people on the streets or unhoused, unsafely housed, you're doing an assessment of their need, you're tracking them by name so that as housing opportunities open up in your community, you can get folks matched correctly. And that is the best way to decrease homelessness. And so congratulations, Glenwood, not every community has Built for Zero. So we have something to build upon. It's very exciting. And the fact that you've got this infrastructure with all these funds coming in, when you call Zach at the state, which I'm sure Debbie and Nan and others do, we call Zach all the time. Zach, we want this money. He's going to say, show me your data. And you've got data building in your community to show that need. So pretty exciting stuff. I know, Kathleen, you love to talk about millions. You can talk about the millions.
I love talking about millions of dollars. We know that $67 million is coming into the state of Colorado. This money is specifically to stabilize those who are at risk of becoming homeless and to help those who are homeless. This is the first time that we are seeing funds that are supposed to be a housing first model. So not just providing really blanketed emergency shelter resources, which a lot of times is what local communities are left with because that's what the state regulates. But this is asking you to be innovative. It is the first time in the history of our nation we have seen money coming down with the word be innovative attached to it. So we're talking hotel conversions. We're talking about building more affordable housing and obtaining land. These are things we've never seen before. So we have tons and tons of money coming down. We also, of course, are seeing a lot of conversation around coalition building within communities. So that is why one of the reasons that Debbie and all of our great sponsors have wanted to start this conversation this evening.
Just one last comment about all this. Again, coordination and strategy, you all know this, it's the only way to decrease homelessness. And I have this slide I wish I would have used, but I'll use it next time. It's a beautiful slide that says, how do we move communities from managing a problem to the solution, right? Getting to the questions. This is the fun part. So should we stop this?
The slide here, yeah.
Go back to seeing those faces. So I think what we'd like you to do is raise your hand if you have a question, comment, want to talk about, and especially if there's something we didn't touch that we should have touched, or something that didn't sound right, or something that did. Go ahead, Dr. Edward.
My background is psychology. I'd like to point out that being homeless itself is trauma, and it actually can perpetuate trauma, and it's a downward spiral with trauma, and it can create complex PTSD issues for a lot of these people. So the homelessness itself can be considered a psychological issue.
Yeah.
But just wanted to throw
Absolutely.
that out.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. You're absolutely right. And that's something that we commonly hear when we speak with unhoused individuals across the state, is that what created their unhoused situation is one trauma. What they've experienced while unhoused continues to be layers of trauma. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, Chrissy, I see you.
Hi, thank you guys for putting this together. I come at this from a business owner perspective. So I own a retail store in Glenwood Springs and also soon to be in Boulder. And we experience some homelessness actually in both of our stores and my other upcoming store. So one of the things that we come across as business owners is the people that are unhoused come and basically hang out at our store. You know, and we try to navigate it as best as we can. And a lot of these people we understand have mental disorders, but I would like to be able to provide my employees with a source that they can contact, because I know a lot of the time we don't want to really bring police into the situation, but when people are just kind of constantly hanging out in our store, we just don't really have a resource for our employees.
Let me try this, and then I'd love to hear Kathleen's experience. But we had in Durango, our business improvement district about 3 years ago, got the business owners together and said, you know, this isn't working. And so they did multiple strategies. One was they started funding outreach. So I think in a perfect world, you've got somebody the community shares that is moving throughout your business district and trying to connect people to resources. So I think that's one idea. I think the second idea is having a place where people can get resources that's not all downtown.
Yeah. In specifically the Glenwood area, you know, as business owners, is there, I don't know if there's a place that is able to provide the downtown business owners with flyers that we can hand to people, or a number that we can call. For instance, we had a gal in the other day who didn't have a place to go. She very severely had a mental disability, and she just wanted to stay and hang out. But at that point, my husband didn't know what to do, so he called a taxi cab to bring her to the hospital. And the taxi cab, she didn't have proof of Medicaid, so he wouldn't take her anywhere. So then she came back and just hung out. So as business owners, I mean, in the Glenwood area, is there a resource, like pamphlet, that we can give to people, or somebody to call when we get stuck in situations like that? Or is the police the best source for us to call, in your opinion?
So yeah, I say Debbie,
that one's coming to me, right? Yeah, great. Thank you for bringing that question up and that issue. So these are some of the things that we've been working on, and a perfect opportunity. We're hoping to launch some outreach workers in July. We have half of the funding. We're working towards some of the other half of that. So we were looking at the hospitals for help, but maybe there's some, you know, maybe we need to look in the business community as well. But as we wait for maybe some of the other dollars that can support that, because we do really need that outreach piece. We have a group that's on right now. We're down to one person, called the Mobile Recovery Team, working in Mind Springs, and that has been focused on recovery issues, and they're not 24/7. So we're trying to pivot some of that time to homelessness, and to be that exactly like what you're saying, Chrissy. So you can call and say, hey, this is where I need somebody. So that is in the works. I'll tell you where I'm able to give updates on that, and who I've been talking with is Laura with the DDA, and then also Angie with the Chamber, and Matt with Economic Development Council. So been working with all of them there, and that's where we can kind of focus that. The idea of pamphlets, right, that we have some informational pieces out. The other piece is helping with the dealing with difficult behaviors. If you've seen that, I hope you've seen that training opportunity, and this is for everybody. And this will open it up to the whole community. It's been kind of business community and nonprofits for the last couple months. We've tested it, but just an hour with Michelle Muthing, who's with the Hope Center, who is just a crisis guru, if you would. And the Hope Center responds with law enforcement. Oh, you know what? I'm getting really fast, aren't I, with interpretation? I just really, let me slow that down. Sorry, Manuel. That people have just an hour there, and it's free because different organizations are sponsoring it. And it really is to understand how to take care of yourself, take care of the environment, that you can't really manage a person, right? And if you have to get to call 911, how do you do that safely? But there really is this de-escalation and also helping to understand the behavior that you're seeing. Not trying to be the, okay, now we've got this all figured out, and who to call, which would be that crisis team. So we're trying to put all these pieces together, and I think that's going to have a huge part of the community just feeling more powerful. And the piece about it is this is not just homeless, right? We can have someone who's a visitor, who's a tourist, who is having a mental health episode, substance piece. I mean, somebody who lives and works here, but they're under the influence at the time. So all of those kinds of things to have help for everybody, people at the library, people at the community center, everybody who interacts with the public. So thank you for bringing that up. And the other piece that you bring up is a place to be, right? In Rifle, Gabe Cohen, who is so passionate, has put together what's called the Discovery Cafe. And that's particularly the peer community in the recovering community, but it is a place to be and make these connections, just as we heard so much is the isolation and the lack of connection. Another fellow is starting to work on that for the Elgibel area. A great idea for Glenwood, right? And that's part of what I hear from downtown is that people are just hanging out because where are you going to be? So you can only go like, I mean, there's so many ideas and innovations that happen because we understand what the issue is, right? So that's the first part of it, is like if we just think homelessness is addiction, that we would only use those kinds of solutions, right? And what we understand and learn from tonight, and your experience too, many different kinds of things and many different pieces that we would, with Built for Zero, then be able to say one at a time with those calls that we get, what's going on with this person? What's the path they need to be on? How do we know about them? There's also a lot of things in place. We have to get out further to you, but that mobile team person will know it, that we have in place that take care of what the issue you had with the taxi driver in the hospital. So you just brought up tremendous pieces there that I think I love saying, and I know Kathleen and Jen, you would agree with me. There are solutions. I mean, this we can do.
Yep, I would just, Chrissy, thank you for being on. If you can join us for the next two or bring additional business folks, I think you all do some incredible thinking outside the box, and we could use it. So thank you.
You're welcome to do that. One other question. So my new store in Boulder is on a place called The Hill, which I've been told has dramatically increased with homelessness. There's people sleeping on mattresses. And I contacted that neighborhood, and so far they don't really have any resources for that part of Boulder. And I just wanted to see if you guys are able to point me in a direction of somebody I could contact in that area. Do you happen to have any?
Have you contacted the homeless director for the city?
Not yet.
Okay.
I don't know where to start. So
if you could email Debbie for us, we can put our email in the chat. We can get you that name, but that would be somewhere to go.
okay.
So we'll get you that name, and I would start there because she'll know the whole system up there. Dawn, thank you for raising your hand. Thank you, Chrissy.
Hi, so I've been passionate about this issue of homelessness since I was a teenager in the 80s living on the streets of San Francisco. I've since been a 911 dispatcher and trauma-informed yoga teacher, and now at the current moment, I'm a bus driver. And I have to say that we see a tremendous, like being a bus driver, sometimes I feel an incredible sense of despair because of the amount of homelessness that I encounter and my sense of helplessness in the face of it. And that would be something that I would term as empathic distress. And I think that's what a lot of people react to homelessness with, is a sense of empathic distress. And we don't want to see it. We don't want to feel it. It's a really uncomfortable feeling when somebody says to me at the end of my shift, and it's December or January, and it's cold, and he's sleeping in a bus stop, and that's my last stop, and he wants to know where he can go, and I have no information for him. I have nothing to give him. I know a lot of bus drivers experience empathic distress, and it can look like a severe lack of compassion because they just shut down. They don't know what to do. So I'm really happy. I just by chance saw this meeting, and I'm really happy that the city of Glenwood is doing something to try to address it. Debbie, hi. It's really great to see you. I want to be a part of this going forward. I've been really overwhelmed in the last year with a lot of other things and keeping some of my people in my personal life from becoming homeless. I just want to be a part of this and loop the bus drivers in, keep us in the loop, let us know where we can send people and how we can help people. Because I know so many bus drivers that really want to help and they just feel helpless.
Thank you,
Dawn, it's great to see you, and terrific point about bus drivers. Thank you. I will definitely be in touch.
And Dawn, great point about secondary trauma and finding supports. So hearing a lot in other communities about service providers, getting together around secondary trauma and creating space.
Are there any other questions, comments? Yes, I may say your name wrong. I'm sorry. Sopris?
Hey, wondering, will you make this presentation available? There was so much information, and I'd really like to look through it again. A lot of statistics to digest.
I will apologize. That's me and my professor background. But yes, I will make this available. Matt Lynn, who has set all this up and is doing wonderful, will send you all an email with the link as well as with this recording.
Thanks for being here, Raleigh.
Yeah, thank you all.
Great to see you. Yeah, you'll have all this information. Yeah, and you know where to find me. I know. So. Good.
Are there any other questions? Well, I'd like to share. Do you have another one?
I was just gonna, no, go ahead and share.
Sure. Sharing my screen one more time. It'll let me.
Say, Kathleen, while you're getting there, I just wanted to make one observation that struck me with the statistics and everything that you showed, right? Because let me just say that this is one of the things that I ran into over and again, and especially initially as I started kind of on this journey and looking in our community. You know, if we have more services, we'll have more homeless. You know, and there's a fear. So let's don't do anything because maybe if we don't, then we'll have less. And one of the slides that was so apparent, right, and obvious was during COVID, when we had less services, markedly less services, whether it was food or shelter or any kind of things, we had much more homelessness and much more visible homelessness and much more really, let's say, severe or the homelessness that we would be really concerned about. So I just thought that was an interesting reality check.
Sure. Debbie, I'd love to tag team on that because that was a huge issue. We did a full homeless plan a couple years ago in Durango, and this was a big bone of contention in that. And we had unhoused, impacted neighbors and service providers, right? Business owners. So it was a pretty juicy conversation. And what the service providers said to us over and over again is, we're not worried about prioritizing local, because what happens is it's so hard to access services that if you're transient, you know, there's all kinds of different terms for folks who are coming for a season or coming through. It's so hard to access a lot of the services that they give up. I mean, I hate to say that, but they come, they try to get the services, they get frustrated, and they keep going. And so the service providers are like, that is not where we need to focus. We need to focus on how to help folks who went to high school, you know, the folks that are here engaging in services, like something like 65 or 70% are local. And so that was really interesting to hear that. So I don't know if it's true there, but it resonated as something that made sense to me.
And as we talk through solutions and as we talk through different best practices and models, we'll actually address that a little bit more deeply as did this. Statistically, the best practices do not bring others, but it is a very common concern and it's valid. You know, we want to make sure that as we're solving something, we don't end up having to solve it for the entire state. So we will dive a little bit more deeply into that as well, and sort of what has been seen with all the models that we're going to present. And then one of the things we really want to do, again, we're so excited you all jumped on. We know we have people who couldn't get on but are going to listen to the recording. We would love for you to tell a friend, bring your community members. If you're a business owner, bring other business owners. You know, if you're a bus driver, bring your other, you know, coworkers who see this and have that.
And our people, faith communities.
And faith communities. You know, we invite everyone to the table and really to have a true dialogue. We want everyone's voice at this table. So our next session is June, it says should be 16th. So it's June 16th is session 2. Matt and Lynn has that. This, of course, will be shared with you so that you can get on and register. If you have any questions, concerns, let us know. We would love to have you fill out a post-event survey. If there are things you didn't want to unmute and say, as well as a couple of questions we'd love to know, because what we really want to do is make this about Glenwood. We really want to be able to meet what your needs are, what you're feeling, what your concerns are. And so this survey is really going to let us know that. Again, they're anonymous. There is a place if you want to be involved where you can put your information down for Debbie and for us. But again, please feel free to get on. We really encourage everyone to fill out that survey and then join us for our next session.
And just a little sneak peek, again, the next session, we're going to be covering the best practices, and they're evolving very quickly. So if you want to make sure we cover something, if there's something that your community has been, you know, grappling with or really wants to innovate around, if you get us the information ahead of time, we'll go a lot deeper in that area. And then the final session, we're hoping to be in person, interactive, very interactive around taking some of those best practices and starting to put together a couple of strategies that feel very manageable, that would help you leverage these resources and move forward as a community.